How many times have I told y'all that this is one of the most anti-black racist administrations we've ever seen? Check this out here. The federal government no longer explicitly prohibits contractors from having segregated restaurants, waiting rooms, and drinking fountains. The segregation clause is one of several identified in a public memo issued by the General Services Administration last month, affecting all civil federal agencies. The memo explains that it is making changes prompted by Donald Trump's executive order on diversity, equity, and inclusion, which repealed an executive order signed by President Lyndon B. Johnson in 1965 regarding federal contractors and non-discrimination. So there's been a lot of reporting around this, and so the whole goal is to say all these companies that you don't have to abide by these rules that say that you can't discriminate. What do you make of this, Larry? And I keep saying that, you know, probably the most violent racist we've ever had in the White House, and this says a lot, is Woodrow Wilson. This administration wants to defund Black America. It is targeting Black people. They are anti-Black. We can go on and on and on, and this, of course, is just another part of that.
Yeah, this is part of, the very beginning of a long 4 years. And Roland, I was on your show last week, and I said, we've been focusing on like this, we're using the phrase anti-DEI. We should be saying these people are pro-Jim Crow because, and this is a perfect example. This strong focus on anti-DEI, you're right, it's centered on anti-Blackness. It is focused on dismantling all the progress that was made, and obviously we talked on your show a lot about the Great Society programs, the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, Fair Housing Act, et cetera. It is, and this, when he signed this executive order in the very beginning of his presidency, it was very clear about what he was trying to do here. Obviously, when we talk about federal contracts, that's taxpayer money. So we're not moving forward. They're trying to dismantle, once again, all the programs that were created that was for over decades, really over centuries, in terms of Black folks, in terms of being on equal footing, or trying to get as close to equal footing. They're dismantling all those programs and using taxpayer dollars to do that. And so when Ellie was on before, we talked about, I mentioned, we have to focus on discord and not decorum. People have to be willing, and I know Black people are tired, but they have to be willing when we see things like this to make sure we're heard, not just at town halls, but various other methods we have to use to make sure that these kinds of things are reversed. Because you go back to LBJ in terms of the work he did, like I said, with the Great Society programs and signing the executive order. And now here we are with a president of the United States policy that says openly say, you know what, don't worry about that. Don't worry about Jim Crow. Just go ahead and reinstitute that. And we'll keep moving forward to make sure every program, every right that Black folks have fought for decades is eliminated. And this is, once again, another terrible example of that.
Morgan, I have made this clear that, and I made it very clear, of course, in my book, White Fear, that people need to understand what is really going on here. The right is trying to target every economic program or initiative that has aided Black people and benefited many others since the Black freedom movement or the civil rights movement. That's what this is all about. To attack affirmative action in colleges and universities, to attack programs in law firms, to attack programs in corporate America, to attack programs in government. They are operating by this, oh no, it's about doing what's right and just and about being fair, and it's about a meritocracy, when the fact of the matter is this country has never had a meritocracy. It's never existed, ever. It benefited white men, it benefited landowners, didn't benefit white women, didn't benefit Black people and others. And so in their minds that this is the greatest harm. And in fact, the Washington Post got a hold, Washington Post or New York Times, one of them, got a hold of the Doge plan. And the first 6 months was all attacking DEI, and that means attacking Black people. This is a massive economic assault on Black America. And I don't think even a lot of us really understand how deep this is?
I think that's right. I mean, taking this example, it is wrapped in a couple of things in terms of how it's getting implemented. So like the NIH guidance, once this policy came down, was, okay, we're going to get rid of the ban on segregation, but then also we're going to get rid of our equal opportunity program, which would likely benefit a lot of Black contractors. Exactly what you're saying, Roland. I mean, it's kind of wrapping this idea of like, meritocracy. Well, we don't really have segregated facilities. This isn't that big of a deal. Okay. But you probably aren't going to hear about this other piece that maybe is having a very, and not to say that we have at all solved for racial discrimination, obviously, but that the equal opportunity program is having a very direct impact on a certain segment of our community being able to get contracts, make money, build wealth, et cetera. I will say, though, and this is something that's come up in conversations, and why this strategy, in my opinion, is somewhat successful, or successful enough to get this administration the support they're looking for from our community and others, because we do have to be honest about the fact that some people from our community did vote for this administration, is that, and again, I would be very interested in the panel that, well, what have these programs done for me lately? I have never gotten access to that type of contract. We've had generations of these contracts. It has not impacted the economic reality in a significant way for, let's call it, at least 50% of the Black community. And I'm never going to work at a corporate law firm. So what does this have to do with me? And look, we can spend some time on that, but I do think we have to be real about that sentiment that for a big segment of our community, there has not been that economic advancement. And getting back to one of the things that Ellie mentioned when we're talking about, building a successful coalition, an administration that will support having these types of opportunities available, we have to think about what those economic messages are going to be able to get enough people to support in the right direction.
Here's how I would address that. And I've heard this before, it hasn't benefited me. Okay. Anybody in your family? Anybody in your neighborhood? Anybody in your church? The reality is last year, and it's not like we should be jumping up and down because it wasn't even 2%. But last year, the reality is that Black contractors received $10 billion in federal contracts. Again, it wasn't even 2%. So I would say to those people, so do you want Black contractors getting $5 billion? How about $3 billion? How about we go down to $2 billion? Because here's the reality. In Black neighborhoods, you have Black organizations that are dependent upon the largesse of Black people who work. Black churches, HBCUs. So when someone makes that comment, Mustafa, they're actually not looking at Black people in the aggregate or as a whole. And so when I hear people, you hear this phrase, Democrats have never done anything for us. Well, that's also a lie. I mean, so it's also a lie to say Republicans have never done anything for us. I mean, there are little programs you can actually point to. But you can also say, okay, so what do you think Black life is without any of those programs? Like if you want to have that conversation, sure, let's have it. And we'll show you what that actually looks like. Doesn't look good. And that to me, Mustafa, is a massive mistake if that is the position of a lot of Black people, because what you're then doing is you're giving them license to say, oh yeah, we can go ahead and gut it. This ain't gonna be a problem at all.
Right. We should actually be focused on how do we expand the sets of opportunities that are in front of us and understand the steps that are necessary. Because we often on the show talk about the wealth gap that exists. We know that this plays a small role in helping to address that. We understand that let's anchor it in this, because folks miss this, and I talk to people all across the country. These are your tax dollars. So if you're not getting some of those tax dollars back, then that means that they're going to other communities. They're going to others who may not be looking for opportunities to reinvest inside.
In fact, Mustafa, let's take it back to Jim Crow.
Mm-hmm.
There were decades that black people were paying into a system if they never got anything back. Mm-hmm. They didn't get roads, bridges, schools. They didn't get any of this. We were paying into this system. Literally, white folks were being able to live a grand life because they were benefiting from the tax dollars, property taxes, income taxes, sales tax of black people during Jim Crow, and we got virtually no benefit.
That's exactly right. And I would encourage folks, I'm not going to give you homework, but I would say, if you really want to understand what's going on in this moment, if you really want to be anchored in this conversation that we're having right now, go back and look at President Andrew Johnson. Because in 1866, he actually vetoed the Civil Rights Act. He was against the Freedmen's Bureau. He believed that in the South, only white men should govern. Now, that sounds really familiar to sets of actions that are currently going on. So when Roland talks about, and the other panelists who are sharing right now are talking about resources and who has access to those resources. And if we pretend like, even though it may be a smaller percentage that is coming into our communities, like that it is not a big deal, then we start this self-fulfilling prophecy where people can begin to repeal in all other aspects of the economic life inside of our communities and outside of that. So I know everybody, means well when we have these conversations, but we have to look deeper, because many times we are having a surface conversation and not really seeing the dynamics that go on behind the scenes. After decades of working in the federal government and pushing back, even when I was in the federal government, against injustices that I saw these opportunities for our communities to better be able to fund, and nobody was giving us anything. It was really our dollars that were being redirected to other communities, to other initiatives, and not the ones that communities were actually asking for. So we just got to make sure that we have a much better understanding of how we build a stronger economic infrastructure, which then gives us the opportunity to create stronger infrastructure in all the other aspects that are critical to healthy and sustainable communities, that come from where we are.
Larry's also trying to get people to understand that if you have black doctors in your neighborhood, you are benefiting from programs. You want the black lawyers. You want black entrepreneurs. You want black entrepreneurs in your area. Okay, how do you think these things happen? See, I think we make a serious mistake. And I get it. When we become I haven't gotten anything. And whenever I remember we were on the road, I forgot where we were broadcasting. And the brother put that out there. My response was, who did you ask? What did you apply for? I said, at some point, you can't just look at this as, well, let it all go because I haven't benefited, when if we start breaking these things down, no, you've actually benefited. You've actually benefited from a lot of this. But there's a difference between a direct benefit and an indirect benefit.
Roland, I've talked about this on your show before. We have to, first of all, and maybe this goes back to like the Freedom School Project and doing this during the summertime. We have to do a better job of really, in your show, that's why your show is so important, explaining to people how these systems are linked. And part of the reason why we have a president we have today is because people don't understand some of the basic, simple ideas about federal resources. The other thing is I want to highlight one thing you said about, you mentioned black physicians, lawyers, et cetera. The importance of black physicians alone in the community. There was a study came out a couple of years ago that found out black infants are two to three more times more likely to die if they had a white physician compared to having a black physician. And let's sit with that for a second. In addition, there are a lot of folks out here who are getting away from the idea of communalism. The reason why black folks we are where we are today, beyond the fact we've continued to deal with systemic racism, is because we have a strong sense of communalism that goes back to our ancestors, slave Africans being brought here to the United States. This idea of communalism is what's kept us as sane as possible, and why we've been able to in some ways navigate these economic, political, and social systems. So this idea that people don't see how they're benefited is we have to do a better job of explaining to people how, like you did, articulating how these systems work. B, we have to do a good job of highlighting if these systems don't exist. We talk about Jim Crow in terms of the challenges that black folks face. In addition, we have to remind people that even though there are some of our people on our panel and some black folks throughout the country who are successful, it's a reminder that those numbers should be quadruple what they are, whatever our discipline or our place of study is. But because the system is embedded in white supremacy, even those black folks have had a hard time getting to where we are. So the idea is it's not us. It's not that we don't benefit from the system. We do. But the idea is the system is so complicated and geared towards, limiting our success that you may not necessarily see it immediately or, your immediate community, even though you benefit from it. The idea is to be far more black people thriving economically, politically, et cetera. If we dismantle the system to make sure that black folks have the chances that we deserve as U.S. citizens.
Okay, so
Roland,
somebody
Roland,
just posted.
Roland?
Hold on one moment. Someone just posted in the chat. I found out my doctor was racist during COVID. When I think about opioids, the numbers have changed in the last several years. But in the first 3 to 5 years, racism actually, I know people may think this sounds crazy, but that was probably one of the few times black people benefited from racism. White doctors believed that black people had drug problems. So therefore, they prescribed black people to take Tylenol. They were initially prescribing white folks OxyContin and a lot of the other powerful opioids. That's a perfect example, to Larry's point, when you have black healthcare professionals who are able, I just saw a story, I think her last name was Castleberry, a very prominent sister on YouTube, or she was on TikTok, it was something along those lines. She was a social media influencer. And for 8 months, her white doctors kept telling her that she had a fibroid problem. Come to find out, she had cervical cancer. When it was finally diagnosed, it was stage 3. She died a few months later. So I need people to understand that when you look at medical school programs, when you look at student loan programs, when you look at, there have been things that have been done that have aided the rise of black doctors and black lawyers and black engineers and black professionals. And also, I think we got to also be willing to challenge our own people who don't know shit. Because in your own community, if you're like, okay, do I accept what I have or do I want straight? I just keep going back. I just keep going back to my life growing up in Clinton Park in Houston. We lived 8 blocks from my grandparents. My parents didn't go to college. Both worked. Combined, never made more than $50,000 a year. 5 children. And when they decided to join with others to launch a civic club, they were asking very basic things. How do we get new streetlights? How do we get new streets? How do we tear down overgrown lots? How do we get rid of these abandoned houses that have now turned into crack dens? How do we get stepped up police patrols? How do we get our park rebuilt? How can we convert this old firehouse into a senior citizen center? These were regular, ordinary people who didn't have college degrees, who didn't have lots of money, but they cared enough to say, okay, there are things that we want in our neighborhood. Who do we go ask? Is it the city? Is it the county? Is it the federal government? Is it the school district? That's what it is. I just think a lot of times, Morgan, and I want you to make the point that you were going to make, but I also want y'all to address this. I just think a lot of times we let too many people in our community off the hook. I think we do not challenge people in our community enough to give a damn about where they live. Now, I know somebody's sitting here saying, oh, Roland, that's easy for you to say, position that you're in. No, I'm putting myself in that chair when I was 10 and 11. I am not speaking through the lens of where I live and how much I make today. I'm looking at when I was traveling with my mama to the state capitol for rallies with the metropolitan organization. I'm putting myself in the position of being 14 and 15 and speaking before the Houston City Council. I did not have politically connected, financially endowed parents or grandparents. What I did have, though, were a group of people who actually gave a damn about their community, a group of people who actually cared enough. I just think we have to, at this moment, we have to be challenging our folk to do less bitching and moaning and then do more organizing and mobilizing. Morgan, go ahead.
Well, look, Roland, I mean, and I identify a lot with what you said. I also have benefited from a strong community. Challenges, came our way growing up, but we were able to overcome them because of the root of a strong community, strong parenting. And that put me in a position. I'm going to shout out also your first guest tonight, Michael Brown, was the beneficiary of the Ron Brown Scholar Program that allowed me money to pay for college, to pay for law school. So don't get me wrong. I mean, these programs, I do not dispute at all that they have an impact. It is a tangible impact. But what I'm saying and what I'm hearing from people is it is not enough. We don't want a program. We want to be free. And if you are getting stuck in your children in an underperforming school district where we know this is true, you are not even learning how to read for real by the time you hit high school, let alone how to do math, then you are not being positioned to actually take advantage of any of these opportunities that might be available. Multiply that by a couple generations of living through that. And we have to be honest about the fact that we have a segment of our community that is not in a position to really succeed and build strong community and provide all of the resources, Roland, that you and I both had available to us, it sounds like. So why is that? I would say it is about the fact in a big, big way that people do not have enough money and financial stability to be able to reinvest in their community in that way. Are some people just checking out? I absolutely think that's true. But let's even take the example of a Black doctor right now. That Black doctor is going to be entering a healthcare system that is going to stress them out, that is not going to allow them to actually probably have an independent practice where they would be able to be rooted in our community, sponsor the Little League team, do all these things. They're going to get gobbled up by United Healthcare, a huge monopoly that's going to dictate how much they get paid, when they work, and if they don't play by those rules, they will not have a job and be able to practice medicine in this country after probably accumulating $200,000 in debt. So even at the higher end of the class spectrum, I would say now, we're running up against some of these limits for us, let alone the people that have not been able to get into a position based on a substandard education they've received to access that type of opportunity. And if we want to avoid or get out of this mess that we currently find ourselves in, we have to be real about that. We have to have a more aggressive vision for what the future is going to be so that more people from our community are in a position to really reinvest and build strong communities.
Which is why I believe, Mustafa, to the point I think you made it earlier, is that what you can't do is lose what you already got. and I think the mistake that, and I've heard people do this, the mistake that people make is, okay, you say, well, like perfect example, if you look at the federal MWBE contracts, white women get 78% of those contracts. And so I'll hear somebody say, well, that ain't benefiting us. But the black contracts last year were a record $10 billion. So the point you're making, all y'all are making, I'm making as well, I don't want to go backwards to try to go forward. My deal is I'm going to fight where we are right now, to keep it where we are now and build upon that. The worst thing would be to sit here, which we saw in 2008, 2009, 2010, and 2011 with the home foreclosure crisis. We saw 53% of black wealth wiped out because of the home foreclosure crisis. Now, I remember when people were saying, oh my goodness, the richest black county in America is Prince George's County. And I kept saying, I need y'all to stop saying it's the richest county. I need y'all to stop saying it's the wealthiest county. So I was like, why are you hating? So I'm not hating. I said, do they own the homes outright? I said, no. I said, if there's an economic calamity, guess what? They're going to lose them homes. And what happened? Home foreclosure crisis hit. Middle class, upper middle class, black communities across America got demolished because a lot of folk couldn't afford those balloon payments. I said, so stop saying somebody's wealthy. Wealthy folk ain't going to lose their house when the market goes under. So I had to walk people through that. But where we cannot be, Mustafa, we cannot be in a situation where we are losing ground voluntarily. That to me is what's crazy when people say, yeah, man, and we heard it last year. Man, you know what? I'd rather have Trump back because I had money in my pockets when Trump was there. You know you had money in your pockets when Trump was there because that wasn't about Trump. So I was like, what you mean it wasn't about Trump? I got an email from a brother, right? Compton. Yeah, man, we had money in our pockets when Trump was there. I said, PPP fraud is not money in your pocket. I said, the so-called Trump economy of 2017, 18, and 19, that wasn't Trump. That was Obama. All the hell that we went through in 2009, 10, and 11 positioned us for 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. And all the hell we went through coming out of COVID after Trump screwed up in 2020, and then the hell in 2021 and 22, building out of the economy, that was Biden-Harris. So I don't want us to lose ground. That to me is the danger. When Morgan talked about it, the language that people are using, the danger is they are willing to allow us to cede ground that was fought with blood, tears, and black death.
We just have to be extremely careful that we don't continue, not all folks, but we can't allow any of our folks to lower expectations. I see it all the time. I've worked in over 1,000 communities. The places that thrive have changed their mindset. They've done the work of learning and listening and then bringing their own expertise and innovation and ingenuity into a space and building. And when folks build, then they're reaching over and behind to make sure that somebody else is coming along. And then there's the expectation that those folks have to do that. We can't go back. I ran track in college. I was pretty fast. And if every time I got to the 100-meter line, if I'm running the 400 and then I have to go back 50 yards or go back to the starting line and go, there's no way that I could ever win the race. And we've got to just make sure. I use that analogy because we have become so used to being beaten down. We've become so used, some folks, to not having the information, to not having somebody who says, brother, sister, family, This is how you can do this. And when we do this, then we can get stronger together and we can make sure that more folks are actually thriving. Because so many people have just been through so much that sometimes they get locked into this survival mentality. And survival mentality means that you are constantly on defense and you are never on offense, thinking critically about how do I make moves? How do I actually build a strong infrastructure, not just underneath of myself, but underneath of my family, and then expanding out to my community and expanding out to my people. That's the mindset that you have to get to. But you've also got to have a place where people can help you to learn how do you navigate these systems. We always talk about breaking the system down. You know, I think that that's fantastic if it was a possibility. I think you got to figure out how you navigate stuff, and you may bring new elements in. But I'm always willing to learn. So if somebody has figured out how do you completely dismantle a system and rebuild it, I am more than willing to listen to that. But until I see that in practice and see it how it is uplifting enough of us, then we've got to make sure that we are actually holding our arms around each other, making sure that nobody's just holding on to information and lessons learned and best practices, and making sure that folks are getting that information and that we're trusting each other. But trust comes through interactions and for people showing up, even folks who look like us. We still got to continue to show up. And if we're going to build trust, then we got to stick and stay with each other. And that is so critical in this moment. Because if we are not truly, and I heard Larry earlier talking about community, if we are not building real community in this moment, then a whole bunch of folks are going to be in some very devastating situations, because there is intentionality in making sure that they are stripping away the various resources, but also the erasure of the successes that have happened. And we can't allow that. And that means that not only that we operate with our hands and making sure that we are shouting out and educating, but we also have to make sure that we are utilizing these amazing brains that we have that have helped us over 400 years to not just survive inside of this country, but that is going to require commitment. And we have to make the decision if we're going to commit to each other.
Now, y'all know, I always do this. I always lay out where where there is something biblical that you can apply to what I just laid out. And when I was talking about how we cannot cede any ground, how it is our responsibility to fight for what we've gotten so far. The reason I need people who are watching and listening to hear this, but also spread this, is because we make a massive mistake when this generation, when I hear people say the things that all three of you have talked about, I've said, I believe that when people make those statements, they're making it out of anger, fear, frustration, brokenness. But they also, as far as I'm concerned, are insulting the very folk who did the fighting. Because the inches that folk fought for, we may want to see yards. They were fighting for inches, and they were able to gain things. And I think about, and I always, when I think about how do you fight over something that you've already won, I always think about, Henry, go to my iPad. I always think about this fantastic story of David's mighty men in 2 Samuel 23, where there was a field of lentils and Israel's troops fled from them. But Shammah was like, no. If God gave us this, I'm going to fight over this insignificant field of lentils. And it said he took his stand in the middle of the field. He defended it and struck the Philistines down, and the Lord brought them about a great victory. My position, Larry, and I'm going to go to a final round, each one of you, is I'm not about to act like that thing is small and insignificant. I'm not going to not fight for Black-owned media dollars when John H. Johnson and Earl Graves and countless others were beating those doors down. I'm not going to sit here and say, well, yeah, I'm not going to fight for these federal contracting programs or the Minority Business Development Agency when it were folk who were doing the work to make that stuff happen. When you talk about Perrin Mitchell, Congressman Perrin Mitchell of Baltimore, who that made that his life's mission in Congress when it came to black contracts, when it came to Maynard Jackson, what he did, Marion Barry, and Andrew Young, and so many others. I believe this is where freedom schools are important. This is where reminding a lot of our folk how we got here is critically important, and letting them know this is not a moment where you give up what was fought for. This is a moment where you say, no, I'm going to go after and grab more land, more territory, but I'm not going to go backwards.
Always forward. And Roland, what is that saying about if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it? And I think that ties into what we're talking about this evening. You have to know the history, and that's why you and I talked about the importance of freedom schools and educating some folks. The other thing is, Roland, is the point you're highlighting is something I've expressed to people during this difficult time is continue to fight forward, maintain what we have, and continue to fight forward. I believe if I'm quiet, that means I'm complicit, and I refuse to be complicit. So we have to, like I said, no steps back, always moving forward. We understand historically that black people have always were fighting against the storm since the first enslaved Africans were here in the 1619. It's always been that case. But we have to continue to stand steadfast. The other thing I want to add is I want to go back to something Morgan said, because a phrase popped into my head. Black people who feel like they don't benefit from the system, Michelle Alexander called them an undercast. Right, those individuals who feel like they're permanently locked out of the system. We have to make sure that understand that those people feel that way for a reason. But once again, we have to also explain to them that there are opportunities to use the system or work within systems within our own community to make sure they can advance and continue to do well. The other thing I would add is that, Roland, the saying is, we started from the bottom, now we're here. Look, black folks have always been fighting to pull ourselves up, and so. And many of us come from, some not always come from, middle class families. Some of us come from working class and underserved communities. But there are some of the most successful black folks in our community have come from very underserved backgrounds. And so we have to continue to remember that, there's folks out there who might be considered part of the undercast, but there's still stories of black folks who regardless of their economic or political situation, have continued to fight, stood steadfast, and then find a way to navigate these systems to make sure we can all prosper.
Morgan?
I'm completely on board with fighting to preserve what we have gained, and I agree that should be a priority. My main point is it is not sufficient. How do we know? Donald Trump is president. And so how we look forward is important. The consensus we're building as a community about what we are working towards is important. And I think it's also important to make sure that we're listening to as many people as possible, including a lot of young people who have very different perspectives in my experience. So absolutely. Fight. We have to maintain. These programs have an impact. The contracts that we've been able to secure have an impact, but it is not enough. And we have to be honest about that.
Mustafa.
I use the words of my grandmother that folks have heard me say before: you have power unless you give it away. You give your power away when you sit on the couch and you don't get up and vote. You give your power away when you allow folks to take your rights away around contracting or economic opportunities. You give your power away when people stop you having the ability to go to certain institutions to learn. You give your power away when people take away your health care. You give your power away when people tell you that that's not the right community for you, or you can't afford to live in that community. We give our power away all the time because we start to believe the narrative that others create. So my grandmother was right. We got to stop giving our power away.
Hello, I'm Isaac Hayes III, founder and CEO of Fanbase. And right now we're accepting investors in our $17 million round to revolutionize the future of social media. Today, for just $399, you can own 60 shares of stock in Fanbase at $665 a share. Go to startengine.com/fanbase and invest today. While the big platforms have grown too massive and disconnected from their users, Fanbase is building a platform where creators and users truly come first. We've already raised $8.6 million from everyday investors who believe in this vision, and now you can join them. This is your chance to invest in a social media tech company with over 1 million users that is disrupting media by allowing anyone to reach all of their following and monetize their content from day one. The market is changing, big platforms are failing to serve their users, and Fanbase is stepping up to fill the gap. Don't wait until it's too late. Invest now. Invest for yourself and your future. Go to startengine.com/fanbase and own the future of social media.